Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Brian Fretwell with Bree Zoller and joined today with Jennifer Mitchell. This is Find It Good, the podcast. Is that how we?
Yes.
Right? Yeah. That's a very, very important introduction to this. So the podcast about connection. Connection is a word that everybody knows. Everybody has felt connection. We've also all felt disconnection. But the reason we have the podcast is like that word means so many different things to so many different people. So we're interested in exploring what connection looks like and feels like from different angles, get an understanding of like what people's definition of that are. Of course, at Finding Good, we look at connection through the lens of neuroscience and how do we create it with individuals and organizations and in different applications. But keenly interested in, like this word that we all share, this thing that is vitally important to all of us, like how do we look at it from different angles? And today we have Jennifer Mitchell.
Hi.
Good to have you here, Jennifer.
Thank you.
And as we've talked about a little bit already, Jennifer, like we're gonna kind of like you have a unique angle in as much as like approaching connection from your own spirituality and your own religion sort of as a Christian. And so like I'm sure that there's a lot of folks that have similar experiences, and so looking forward to this discussion. So we'll start with, as we do with a lot of people, like what's your definition of connection, Jennifer?
Brian, am I going to get to introduce Jen?
Oh shoot, yeah. I'm not in charge of anything. Like I've already thrown off the cadence here. So yes, right. Bree. Well, yeah, we should probably let people know who they. So go ahead, Bree, and I'll go back to my water. Yeah.
So today we're chatting with Jen Mitchell. Jen has a diverse background rooted in environmental education and affordable housing, and her work was once deeply rooted in the tangible realm of addressing pressing and social and environmental challenges. Recently, her insatiable curiosity and desire to explore the depths of human experience propelled her to shift her focus towards the realm of religion. This transition has allowed her to embark on a profound exploration of what binds us together as human beings, seeking to uncover meaning, healing, and connection through thoughtful questions and transformative interactions. So with that,
that's a much better intro than Jen's here to talk about religion. Yeah, there it is. Now you know why there's two of us here. Here we go. Yeah. So with that much clearer introduction, Jennifer, like, again, like that idea of like, what does that word connection mean to you? Like, how do you define it? And then just, where does that come from for you?
I think connection, one of the primary aspects of connection for me is how do we interact in a way that allows us to drop beneath our social masks and interact authentically. And I think whether it's a business environment or a school environment or any sort of environment, it's so easy to adopt a certain role and interact with one another from that role. And one of the things I like being in a religious environment is, on the one hand, there's permission to really explore deeper questions about human existence. What is suffering? What is pain? Why am I in pain? Why am I suffering? Or just those really heavy questions that dig deeply into a person's experience. And yet, on the other hand, I would also say one of the drawbacks of being in a religious environment and focusing on connection is that the assumptions people make about having to adopt this moral front or this mask of piety, and that is not the case. It's stripping all that down so we can just be at our most basic level, human beings interacting from our just base experience of humanity. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, a place to start, hopefully.
Yeah, so you talked about like this shift and like how did connection play into this shift for you, like into moving into that space from where you were before, or did it, right?
No, absolutely. So when I was a journalism major many years ago, I wanted to focus on environmental issues, and in one of my journalism classes, it was the week we had to focus on how do you report mass disaster, and how do you specifically represent the loss of life in mass disaster, whether it's flood, fire, whatever, but specifically the loss of mass life. And even though we were trying to be sensitive and we were trying to convey the humanity in a tragic situation, none of the words, none of the languages, none of the ways we were attempting to connect to students to the material we were being asked to report on worked. It just didn't work for me. And I said, I need something that has more meaning. We aren't capturing the meaning in this journalistic setting about what loss of life means, what these tragic situations mean. And so I had figured, well, what will allow me to ask more meaningful questions and go deeper without having to have this journalistic distance? And so that's why I decided to pursue religion. And it was through that initial exploration, and which ultimately led me here, but without, well, this is actually a long story, without withdrawing from that environmental interest. So at the time when I made that shift, I was working for a nonprofit focused on environmental education, and we had just completed a water festival where we had to interact with 4th, 5th, and 6th graders giving little presentations. And we had a class of Muslim little girls. And I was shocked. I'm like, I don't really understand how the Muslim community or any religious community understands religious issues or environmental issues. How do I connect with them? How do I understand how they understand their connection to the physical world and the environment? And so that was the initial sort of impetus to explore this realm of connection, religion, environment, and meaning.
And so when you say here, like what is here? Like what do you currently do? Like, so physically location here, because your reference the work you're doing, like where you're at, like tell us a bit about that.
I work in a parish community. I work for the Greek Orthodox Church here in Irvine at a specific parish. And my role is I'm the librarian. I'm here in the library today. But I also interact with people on a daily basis, people in pain, people who need information, people who are a lot of new people, a lot of visitors. We get people from all over the world. I'm having to constantly interact with people where there's a language barrier. How do you communicate when you don't share a language? How do you find out what someone needs from us? And in a larger situation, are they in pain? Are they in suffering? Do they need some sort of social services or anything? So that's a large part of it. The other part of it is education, helping people understand what is Orthodox Christianity, but also the history of Christianity in general. We have a 9-month class, which is my favorite thing to do. And we just finished it earlier this month. And it's connecting with students and helping them feel okay to ask those deeper questions that they perhaps always had in the back of their mind, but never felt they had permission to ask.
Like what are some of those questions? And then I want to get into like how you actually, like, what is your process for building the safety so those questions can be explored? Yeah. Those questions.
Everybody thinks they're the first ones asking their questions. So when they come to this community of sort of seekers and they're all asking collectively, there's that beautiful collective connection between people asking similar questions. So then that's an aspect of safety. Oh, they're asking, I can ask too. But a lot of the questions are just similar. Why is the world the way it is? Why are things so painful? Why is there suffering? Why is there evil? All of those standard questions. And there aren't necessarily black and white answers to those questions. But at least here, they hopefully have an opportunity to feel safe asking and exploring.
And tell me about like how that's different from, so you talked as a journalist, you were like, writing the story about it and like what, and so outline the difference between that you felt from, I had to communicate the story to now you're communicating something different. Like, yeah. I
think the difference in a journalistic setting is that you deliberately have to take the I out, your I. And even though you might focus on one or two other stories of people that you encounter, there's a lack of personalness, in my opinion. And I think that lack of personalness creates a barrier to just going deeper, to getting into the messiness and the complexity of a question.
So that was like an individual desire you had, right? Like, is that like you needed to have the I in there? Is that?
Yeah, I needed to have the I in there, and I needed for myself, number one, to explore that sort of gray space that isn't necessarily clearly defined, to allow for ambiguity, to allow for uncertainty. And that isn't necessarily the case when you're in a journalistic setting. You have to be clear. There's not a whole lot of room for ambiguity. You have to talk about facts. You have to talk about clear beginning and end. Here's the facts of the situation. And I wanted a little bit more of the messiness. I didn't necessarily want the clear-cut answer. Like, let's get into the mud a little bit.
So then it sounds like then like that, like it was you that was feeling disconnected as a journalist, and now like have you found for yourself, have you found more connection for yourself? And if so, what has it been like A, how do you know, but B, what is the benefit of it? Assuming you have, yeah.
I would say yes and no. In the areas where I have found more connection, it's almost always through the new people who are exploring these deeper questions in the class setting. So it's a 9-month class. And and I'm not teaching the class. I'm here predominantly with COVID. I had to put everything online. I do the website. I had to put the whole curriculum online. Then we had to do hybrid. So I'm there predominantly in the class setting to interact with the new people, to connect them to any information in the library or to any sort of video or audio that they need to support their learning. But also I found that my role in class, since I wasn't the teacher, so many students would come to me and ask permission to ask questions. I would, that was so interesting for me to hear them come to me and say, well, can I ask this? Is it okay to ask about certain scandals in the Catholic Church or the Orthodox or any sort of church? Can I ask about this? And almost always the answer is absolutely. But just being that safe space for people and then trying to get them to see, well, what do you want to understand more? And I would never ask them, what do you want to learn more? Because I found that people who feel intimidated either in any sort of new setting or a library setting or an information setting, that word learn can sort of make them pull back a little. Whereas if I ask them, what do you understand more? I'm presuming that they already understand something and that they're just looking to open up that understanding to a different level, a deeper level. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm just in these interactions, like the thing that you were looking for when you left journalism, like you're getting, and how do you know you're getting? I'm assuming you're getting, but like how do you know you're getting it in those, either in those interactions or just broader? Like, and what I mean by that is like, is there like, what is changing in you, or what do you have more of, right? That you didn't have in journalism?
I have more authenticity with the people I'm interacting with. I feel like they see me as a safe space to go and ask. I feel like they feel it's okay to be less pulled together, less articulate. They can work out a question with me because I'm not here to judge them. I'm not a higher authority. I'm not one of the priests. It freaks people out that most of my day is spent with priests and during the year, different monastic communities. So I tend not to mention that, but I'm not one of the priests. So they can come to me and I can see the authenticity in the topics they bring up and the vulnerability they express in what they're communicating. And I can talk to them about it as well. So earlier this year, there was a young man going through a lot of stuff, feeling very uncertain about how he should approach just a lot of what he was going through without getting into too much details. And he would stop me. I would be on my way, I would be leaving or this and that. And it was just in that brief moment when I could just see him in this moment of pain and just come out and express, I need help with this, I need help with that. And it wasn't about attempting to present himself in a certain way that was polished or moral or pious. It was just him in his struggle and us coming together in that struggle to help him out.
Did you know when you were in journalism that was something that you were lacking and that you wanted, or was that something that you discovered that you enjoy about this new path that you're on?
No, I could tell that something was lacking. You know, I'm a literature person, and there's always that divide between the literary and poetic aspect of life, which can capture something very personal, very unique, very specific, and yet those specific experiences sort of transcend and convey a universal human experience typically. But you don't always have that in a journalistic setting. You have to take all those sort of poetic bits out of it, and you just have a bare bones experience, which communicates. Journalism is important. I'm not saying that, but it's very different than a more poetically expressed experience. And that's always been straddling those two domains and finding that in conversation with people and really wanting them to go deeper and, well, tell me more about your experience. What are you experiencing? And it's okay. It's okay to be muddled. It's okay to be confused. It's okay to be awkward. Just spit it out, whatever it is. And you don't have to have the language in that moment. And sometimes it's just all in gestures. People figure out and they gesticulate, if sometimes it's that. And yet I will say on the other side of it, what I notice is after people sort of go through the class and let's say they join the community, they start involving themselves in parish life, I notice sadly a shift. Then people want to present themselves as, oh, I got it figured out. I'm all together now. I'm done searching. And that's not the case. And so the challenge for me has been, how do we get back to that place of honest, authentic interaction where it's okay to say, hey, I'm struggling. I don't understand. This makes no sense to me. I feel disconnected. What is faith? What isn't faith? What does that mean in a daily way worked out? How do you live that in a daily way? And sometimes those questions sort of go into the background as someone joins the community. And that's one of the things I'm trying to deal with now. I don't want that. I don't want that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sounds a lot like we talk a lot about like curiosity. Like one of the biggest things that kills connection is when curiosity goes away, right?
Yes.
Like, and there's a lot of I almost never talk about curiosity with like there's an attraction element. Like the more curious you are about someone, there's like attraction. So for instance, like in a relationship, if I grow uncurious about the person, we actually like there's some kind of neuroscience research and that like shows how, again, we become less interested in them and then attracted. But the challenge with that is our brains are so designed for habit, right? And like saving energy, that like losing curiosity is almost this natural progression unless it's built more consciously. So in that, like, what do you like when you see this like natural, like, okay, I figured it out, so now I can go to not burning as much energy with curiosity. Like, how do you maintain your own curiosity about, given your, again, teaching it, you're studying it every day, like what allows you to maintain your own curiosity?
My first response is, oh my gosh, that's not losing curiosity for me is not the problem. On the one hand is what I want to say, because I can ask somebody a million questions. It's feeling, am I at that level of relationship with that person where I can just ask them question after question after question? However, that being said, I think the danger is making assumptions about what you think you know about the other person, even if they're struggling. With someone who's lost a parent and recently, and making an assumption about how that person is experiencing that loss. What is the question that's okay to ask in that setting that doesn't tread insensitively on their experience, but still, I'm totally curious. What is it like that you've lost your parent? And I don't want to seem insensitive sometimes asking those questions. How is it for you? I know the other day you were crying, you were feeling this. What are you feeling now? And I don't always know that it's okay to ask those questions, even though the curiosity is always there. Yeah. I myself, the problem I have is pulling that curiosity back. It's like, oh no, I'm being too curious. I need to get back.
Yeah, it was. Oh, go ahead, Bree. Yeah.
Well, I was curious about tying this curiosity aspect into faith as well. Were you going to stay on that line of thought with Jen though, Brian? I want to make sure that we don't lose that question.
Oh yeah. No, you're good. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, you mentioned being curious about the other person and always having that conversation with them, wanting to understand them a little bit deeper, and particularly then shifting it into the religious context. You said, what is faith and what is not faith earlier. And I'm wondering if what you see when it comes to other people's curiosity in the church or in the religious aspects that you're exploring, like, do you find that people perhaps have a deeper connection with their religion and their faith when they're curious about it versus those who have it figured out, as you mentioned?
That's an interesting question. I think there's so much. Well, I would say, first of all, people come here with a lot of spiritual wounds, either based on an experience they've had in another tradition or just growing up and with perhaps over-judgmental siblings or parents or whatever. So they're coming here trying to work some of that stuff out. And a lot of it is giving themselves permission to work that out and being curious with themselves about that experience. And then that connects to faith. Because so often I see people just flagellate themselves. Like, I shouldn't be feeling this. I shouldn't be feeling this. And I'm going to say, no, it's part of your human experience. Feel it. And not feeling it is what gets you into problems. Be curious about that. Explore that and making it okay for them to explore that. And when they feel like, okay, I can still see in certain people the tentativeness to explore that, because that's a dark area they don't want to necessarily go into. But I'm like, no, this is all part of our human experience. And we are all here being human. That's the whole point. And in faith, it redeems the humanity. So it's giving them permission to feel that. Not so much, people come here thinking, oh, I just want the facts of the faith, right? I just want church history, or I just want this. But what they come to realize, it's being curious about that own personal experience. How are they relating to themselves, to God, to other people? It's that they have to explore.
Why is that important for them to explore?
Because without that, they're disconnected. It just becomes a mechanical external display of religious activities, or well, this is what I'm supposed to do, is this type of Christian or that kind. It just becomes an external, and it's not rooted. It's not a deeply embodied personal expression of faith and a daily personal struggle. What does it mean to live as a Christian? That for a Christian, that's everybody's daily struggle. And if you distance yourself from that, if you just make it about these external displays, well, a Christian's supposed to be nice. We're supposed to do this, without saying, hey, I don't feel nice now. What does that mean? How do I explore that? What does that mean? Does that mean I'm a bad Christian? Don't go into that place. Just ask. It's not about good or bad. It's about exploring that experience and being okay with that.
Well, and that ties it back into what Brian was saying earlier, like not only the person to person connection that we need to be curious in order to have deeper connection, but it sounds like also for one's faith and one's belief system and exploring their religion, like there's a requirement there to be curious as well in order for us to have that deeper connection with our faith.
What about the person that does just want the answers? You know what I mean? Like what, like if the person is like, why do I need to be curious? That sounds like a lot of work, and quite frankly, maybe even confusing. Like how do you communicate to them that like, especially like somebody that might believe they find comfort in the answers, like how do we approach that? How do you approach that person? Yeah.
Well, initially, and it's interesting, I have a book up here. I won't pull it out, but it's like 465 answers to whatever. So I lean into that initially. I say, okay, what do you want to understand more? Because almost always I find with somebody who's approaching it from an almost an intellectual approach in the beginning, it's okay, lean into that a little bit. That starts the conversation. And one of the things I do when people come here for the first time, like we have our festival in a few weeks, and I'm always involved in the church tours. One of the things that I have somebody do to take them from their head to their body is I take them into the church and I have them light a candle. We have a whole, what's called a narthex, where you can physically light a candle. And so few people have had that experience of getting a candle, lighting it, standing in front of this open flame, saying a prayer or whatever. And I'm amazed at how much that very small gesture can take somebody from the head to the body. And I talk to them about other body oriented things. And just that helps. I'm not sure how to explain it. Just creates a different experience to just take them out of their head. Okay, religion isn't necessarily just about facts and information. It's about an embodied experience. What do we mean by an embodied experience? And rather than telling them, I just show them. And that is just one thing I show them. There's a whole lot of other things. In here, we have a whole lot of iconography. We have 2-story high mosaics. There's surrounded by artwork on every side. And so it's a good place to begin the conversation with people, to make it tactile, to make it sensual, to take them from mind to body, to give them facts and information, to find out, well, how do you absorb information? Do you want audio, video? Are you a reader? And to begin to give them that a little bit, but then to see them open up as they experience more bodily a different aspect of religious tradition.
Well, and this is bringing me back to, I was raised in the Catholic Church, and I'm now agnostic. I don't know what's out there. I'm open to whatever might be in the universe. But one thing that I was thinking about, so I had my Catholic education growing up, where I was told on a weekly basis, this is, these are the stories, this is who you must be. And questions were discouraged. And it was all just kind of like that teaching that, this is what you need to believe. This is what the truth is. I wonder how different that would have been for not only myself, but all of my peers as well, if we had that experience instead of, let's explore this as a whole person, not just these are the teachings, this is what you need to believe, but, let's explore what religion means. How are you experiencing it as an individual, which is a very tricky thing to do with someone who's, I did this from 5 to 13 years old. That's a tricky conversation to have. But I do wonder the difference that would have made for me if that was an option to be curious, because it was a situation where if you ask a question, because it is, period.
Exactly. And I think the Catholic Church, well, the Catholics that we interact here, we do a lot of ecumenical work with Catholics, and we do work together to help create an environment that allows question asking. It's don't shut that down. You need to address these questions. And yes, you're going to provide facts and information, but that's not where it ends. And it's sad. We do have a lot of people who come here who have had that experience of not being able to ask questions in an open environment. And we just finished a couple of weeks ago. We had 2 youth retreats, one in April, another one in May. And the whole point is bring it up. Let's ask it. I mean, it's moderated, but no, whatever is on your mind, bring it up. We're going to hash it out, and it's going to get ugly, but it'll end up in a very, wholehearted ending to the whole thing. It'll be carried through. And discouraging questions never works, because then it just becomes, it'll come out at some point.
Yeah.
And then you don't want to separate that individual and just have that external expression of faith without it being rooted in a whole-bodied experience.
So, and I'm also curious about this, because this is something that's been coming up for me kind of frequently lately. I have a 6-month-old daughter now, and I was raised with a religious experience. And I appreciate having had that experience. And one thing that I was thinking that I would love to do for my daughter is to bring her to all the different types of religious, I don't want to say churches, because it's not all churches. So religious homes, if you will, whatever we want to call them, I'm losing the word, of exposing her to them. And, we could explore going to, everything from Muslim, Judaism, Christian, all the different types of practices that are out there. I'd love for her to have that exposure. Do you have a recommendation on if I were to go and do that with her, what would the approach be? How could I have the conversation? Because it's intimidating going into a place that you're not familiar with.
It really is.
It's so intimidating, but I'd love for her to have that experience of these are how different cultures work, and these are their different belief systems. I think and I would love to get curious with them, but how do I approach that safely?
Yeah, I think my initial recommendation would be, since every church has a different level of hospitality and welcoming attitude, they may or may not be welcoming, I would recommend calling them first. I just want to check it out. I'm a little curious. Is that okay? Can a non-believer or somebody who's not used to or not exposed to a particular tradition just show up? People call here, we say, absolutely, you're going to get the whole hospitality thrown on you. But not every church is the same. And I grew up in a religious home, but I rejected it. I wanted absolutely nothing to do with it until I was later, and went to different worship places. I went to a Buddhist temple, Hindu temple. I love to see that expression of devotion. What are they connecting to, these people in these different worship environments? What is that? Are they connecting to something within themselves? Are they connecting to the divine. What is that? But I also love that, just that expression of devotion, that because something is being pulled out. But I would say just call. I don't know if there's a Buddhist temple in your area. I imagine where you are, there's some diversity. Just give them a call. You might also want to call the local college and see if there's a religious studies department, and maybe call one of the professors and say, here's what I'm interested in. Are there places that you would recommend that I can go to that would be open to someone just to experience for a Sunday or Saturday, whatever their worship tradition? And they might be able to give you some leads.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because that was something where I was like, do I just show up on when they have services? Like, what if they don't want me there? Like, that's a real concern.
And so it makes me kind of want to loop around into, like, you've talked a lot about, like, the questions that people bring, right, and making it safe that they can ask them, like, but what are the questions, I'm curious, what are the questions you use to, like, kind of trigger to sort of put that, like, to almost like, here's the, not necessarily like, here's the questions you should be asking, but like because I find that like, especially as we use questions in ours, it's like, just like a simple one, like going from how was your day to, what was the best part of your day. It's that, like, we're helping their brain access just at a different angle, right? Like, that it wouldn't do necessarily on its own. And some of the more kind of complex interactions we work on in there, like, how does that work for you? What are the questions that you use to almost help guide people into that curiosity?
I would say I use sort of 2 or 3 categories of questions. So at our festival that's going to be here in the next few weeks, we're going to have people who've never been into an Orthodox church. It looks completely foreign to anything they've experienced, because the whole space is filled with art and candles and light and all that kind of stuff. So one of the things I'll ask them is, well, first I won't even ask them a question except, do you want to light a candle, or let me show you how to light a candle, get them from their mind to their body, get them into a more central space where they can now sort of experience the environment. But I might initially ask them is like, well, what are you curious about? What would you like to know more about us? Or it's those very general questions in the beginning. And then after that, when someone starts to come here, I might ask them, I mean, it depends. They'll usually communicate a little bit about what they're going through. And I'll just say, well, tell me more about that. They'll communicate either that they're struggling with something, and I'll say, okay, well, what is that struggle? But if they don't want to go into that, I would say, okay, well, is there something in particular you want to understand better? I almost always start with, what do you want to understand more? What do you want to understand better? I don't ask religious-y questions in the beginning at all, because that can be a trigger for people. And I don't want to trigger anybody that I don't know that well yet, if they have any particular wounds, or if they just want to be sort of distant and not personal in the beginning. I want to make it sort of safe for them.
So I'm curious, in your own transition then, like, as you're thinking about that, because you had mentioned, like, I don't want to tie him into an old, experience that might perhaps be traumatic or something, but you talked about growing up, you had a religious experience and you, like, really pushed away. But it seems to me like making the transition from journalism back into religion, like, you had to reference that experience. How did you reference that experience maybe differently to go from, like, I'm going to push it away into, I'm going to go back into it?
Yeah, well, my grandfather was a pastor growing up, and not, he was one of those charismatic type of pastors that could sell ice cubes to Eskimos. And I wanted nothing to do with that. I'm like, no, I'll just do journalism, just this sort of thing. And when I was making that transition, I still did not want anything personally to do with religion. I'm like, no, I'll just be objective. I will want to understand them all, because my point is, I want to understand meaning. What do people find meaningful? How do they connect with something larger than themselves, deeper than themselves? How is it not always about self-referencing? It shouldn't just be me, me, me. It's me and other, me and whatever is larger. So I was still very, very distant. And I referenced a story in my little write-up to you that I was at an interreligious dialogue, which I love to attend. I love to see the different traditions sort of hash it out. Why are they here? Are they here to agree? Are they here to understand? Are they here to just, what is the point? And someone had approached me and said, oh, well, who are you? What are you with? Assuming that I was with the tradition. And I said, well, and I didn't really know what to say. Like I didn't want to say I'm nothing. I didn't want to say, oh, I'm spiritual but not religious, because that sounded like a cop out. I just said, well, I'm humanist, not realizing that would set this. And this person just went blank, walked away. I'm like, whoa, that was not a positive experience. And so that sort of reinforced at the time, well, I really don't want anything to do with any tradition now. And it wasn't until years later at my grandmother's death, and that's a whole different story. But even when I was in environmental education, interacting with different groups, interacting with this school of Muslim little girls, and I had to fight after that initial interaction with them at the water festival, and they approached us and said, we had a mobile learning center, and they approached me and said, we really want you at our school. And I had to fight for this religious community to get just very basic environmental education. It was sort of ridiculous. And so it was those small things that sort of pulled me back into, let's look more deeply at religion. What role does it serve in our lives? How can we, so there's sort of reverse discrimination in some ways. I don't know if that makes sense.
So it sounds like the experiences you had with curiosity in the different forms, right? And the environmental and then feels like it was just now a sort of can this be applied this way? Feels like it wasn't it was almost feels like you're creating the thing that you were seeking to some degree.
And also because being an environmentalist and enjoying being out in nature and hiking, I always felt that was a way for me to connect to something larger than myself, and also using that as a way in. It's like, what else is here? Is there something more? Is there something deeper? And just wanting to explore that in a greater way, in a larger way. And looking for those traditions. Well, what traditions do have an environmental focus, which are involved environmentally? What is their point of view when it comes to conservation and that sort of thing?
So what allowed you to continue to be curious even in those more shut down experiences that you've had?
I suppose rebelliousness. I mean, when that guy walked away from me, when I said I was a humanist, and I didn't even really understand what I meant by that at the time. And I was like, well, what does that really mean? And then I sort of got angry. I'm like, you know what? Even though this is a conference for interreligious dialogue, it should also permit agnostics. It should also permit atheists. It shouldn't just be dialogues among traditions. What about those outside their tradition? It should be a dialogue with everybody. So I got sort of miffed and a little rebellious. I'm like, no, this is not okay. His reaction to me was not okay. And is this conference really shutting out anybody who's not a part of a tradition? Not okay. So those sorts of things, that more rebellious nature, will keep me curious, not necessarily knowing, well, how can I make that happen? But just having a different kind of response.
Do you think that on a broader, that curiosity is a form of rebellion?
Yes. Oh, yes. I love that. I do think it's a form of rebellion because we go through our lives. People don't seem very curious about one another. We pass people on the street all the time. We aren't asking them questions. We aren't stopping them. Sometimes we barely acknowledge those people we encounter on the street. And I love those interactions in those liminal in-between spaces, at the airport, on an airline, in the supermarket, on the street, on the trail, where two humanities pass and you have an opportunity to offer an exchange, whether it's a deep exchange or just a human response, one human to another. Those are wonderful. And I think it is rebelling, since we just keep this barrier. I'll be polite. You stay over there. I'll stay over here. We're not going to enter into each other's business. Absolutely. It's rebellious. I love that.
And I feel like I personally am on that edge of rebellion of it is scary to be in one bucket and to want to explore other buckets, if you will. Even politically, religion, any faction that you could look at where we put ourselves in these buckets, and then so few conversations happen between these groups. And I think about what an incredible world we would live in if we could have that open, curious conversation instead, and respect one another's viewpoints, respect, and not saying like, oh, I agree with your viewpoint, just I respect your viewpoint. I hear you. I recognize that you have this belief, and I'm what our world would be.
Well, and it makes me go back, and even in hearing the language, it's like, 'cause I spent a lot of time this week, in workshops and in conversations with people that like, it's actually, if for me anyway, and when I think about it through the lens of connection, I think what happens often is we start sharing the viewpoint, and we're not sharing the experience. So like how you came to, like the experiences you had from religion allows me to know who you are. Your viewpoint maybe not, in terms of like letting me know who you are. And so like oftentimes I think when the conversations start with our opinion, our viewpoint, or our perspective, while those things are important, they don't allow us to see each other. And I think that like when I hear, and I don't have a whole lot of, I mean, I grew up in, I sort of went to like whichever church had the best lunch, I guess, or food, right? Like one neighbor that was Catholic, another was LDS, and another was Assembly of God, and it was, like I remember exploring it a little bit as a kid, but it's really never been a big part of of my life. But when I hear that, like you can almost hear it in terms of where the disconnect would happen, because if the conversation starts with, we're sharing, here's my belief and here's your belief, like there's so much assumption built into that versus here's my experience, here's your experience. Because I think that like what like when have you felt the most connected, when have you felt closest to God? Those would be, and again, I don't define myself as a religious or a spiritual person, right? But even for me, I would be deeply interested in hearing how somebody describes like the day or the time they felt closest to whatever divinity was for them, right? Like, or how the time where they were able to use some sort of that, their spirituality to help them or to help someone else through something difficult, and delve into those questions to find life or joy or happiness when they couldn't find it. And for me, those stories are always interesting. No,
absolutely. And that's a great question to start with. And I do ask that question very generically as someone's going to class, or even once they've been through it. Just, what has your experience been so far? What are you experiencing now? Again, not trying to pin them down, but to come from that side of experience, so that they can then share whatever they're interested in sharing. So on my trip recently to Israel, we had a group of Presbyterians who went with us, and I began in the habit. I wanted to understand not just how they were experiencing this whole trip. A lot of it was to monasteries and different things, except when we were in Palestine, and that was really interesting. But I began the habit of asking, what was a highlight for today? What was a highlight for you? Not to say what was good or bad, but what was a highlight? And it was always interesting to see what they would come up with, what for them sort of came up in their interactions that day.
Yeah. I feel like I just spent a whole day, which I did yesterday, just reinforcing for folks and helping them experience like that little shift in question is, it can make such a monumental difference in not just in the relationship, number one, but also in like how we experience events, right? Because our brain's designed mostly to remember the things that we didn't like about it, but like that shift. And on the relationship part, having somebody that's interested in that, like, hey, what was the highlight for you, right? Makes that moment more powerful. It makes that moment more memorable, but it also, like, then we have a moment, and then we're having this other moment, like another human's actually interested in that piece. And it, for me, like those little interactions that we sometimes, I think, take for granted are the thing that make everything else possible, to a degree. Which I also think is probably a good place to Like this feels like a really good, I really enjoyed this conversation, Jennifer. We always, towards the end, there's a couple of things I like to do, like, and one is actually like for you, we've been pummeling you with a bunch of questions. Are there questions you have in return that you know, for either Bree or me, whether it's about the questions we ask or anything broader?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talked about curiosity and sensitivity, and how do you express that curiosity in a way that is sensitive if you think you're going into territory that might be sensitive? How do you still ask the question while being respectful, because you want to know the answer? I mean, does just that wanting to know the answer open that person up to wanting to share?
I think so the wanting to know the answer is super important, because it shows that you value, right? Like there's not very few better experiences than somebody valuing our experience, right? They want to know the story from our perspective, right? So A, that part is super helpful. B, there's a really cool bit of research, and there's actually I don't remember how long ago I listened to it, but on the Hidden Brain podcast, they talk about this sort of bias we have for helping, like the difference in experience between the person being helped and the person helping. And so the person helping generally like overweights, like, am I doing it right? Am I doing the right thing? Does this have right value? But the person being helped is measuring from a completely different bar, right? That experience is so much more helpful, if you will, or valuable than the helper ever thinks it is. It's a really this like in this paradigm of like, and what they were studying was like the reason why, and it was based on the bystander effect. The reason why people don't help isn't because there's some lazy or negative. It's because they don't believe the help is going to have as much value as it does. And the reality is the help has significantly more value. So the short answer is like, knowing that, and then knowing how it feels when we're asked about our opinion or whatever. My advice is always like it's a little uncomfortable, do it, because your likelihood of offending them or doing the wrong thing, if you're coming from the right direction, is much less than you think it is. And I would rather screw up trying to care than miss an opportunity because I was worried that it would be awkward.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean?
I'd also add on, so Jen, you've experienced this on our Friday practice sessions that we have. A very tangible, tactical tool that you can use is just asking permission, saying, I'm really curious about this, but I want to be sensitive to your comfort level talking about this. I can ask you about this.
Yeah.
Genuinely curious.
Yeah.
And like framing it that way allows that person to say yes or no. Maybe it is uncomfortable for them. And then I think another tool that we have is also to make it safe for them by showing them with, I say, simpler questions where they can reveal a little bit, not too much, and show them that we are here to just listen. We're not here to then, they respond and then we respond at them. But instead to show them, I am here just to listen. I'm here to, be trustworthy, to be open to whatever your response is. So it's demonstrating that, and then just being very clear of like, I'm curious. Yeah. Are you open to it? Yeah,
that's such a great point. The transparency. Here's why I'm asking. And if you don't want an answer, tell me. Right. Like if you don't, if I'm asking you the wrong thing, tell me. If I make you uncomfortable with the questions, tell me and I'll shut up. But I'm genuinely just curious. And then like Bree said, like just continue to be curious. Like when they give the answer, don't return right away with like your story to, you know what I mean? Just like allow the space. Yeah.
I like that, being transparent. But see, now I'm going to set myself the challenge of, okay, so many people this week, I'm just going to ask various questions of, And I'm curious
Yeah.
about this, I'm curious about that, I'm curious about that.
Well,
I'm so curious to hear.
Yeah, and what I know is what you'll find is like it actually will positively affect your energy level. Like it's like when our brain is curious, like we engage, we pay attention. That's like why I always say we don't have to be reminded to like pay attention to our favorite movie, right? Because we're curious of what is going to happen, and so curiosity naturally drives that energy in the brain. And so like it's good to ask it for them, but like knowing the benefit for us actually makes it more consistent too. Yeah, great question. Yeah. What was your takeaway? So each person's takeaway. Bree, what was your
So my takeaway, actually, this was helpful because it, as I mentioned, I've been curious about how to explore different religions with my daughter in a safe way, in a hopefully where we would be welcomed. And I've got actions now, Jen. Thank you for, just calling up different churches, different organizations, calling up local resources and education as well, and asking them, where's a place we can go just to explore? So, and to be curious. Like, I would also love to have conversations after having that experience, then sitting down with someone and telling me, what is your experience in this church? What's your experience with this religion? So I took actions from both of you in this of how I'm going to go about exploring spirituality with my daughter.
And you'll notice she'll respond to different things centrally, whether it's the music or whether it's the artwork. I mean, at different ages, they'll respond differently to the.
I know. And I can't wait for that. That was something that I loved so much growing up, was the singing.
Yes.
I loved that. And so I'm excited for this. That's my takeaway, Brian.
and Jennifer, how about you? What's your takeaway in the
my takeaway is that being curious is rebellious, and I absolutely love that. And the importance of being transparent in your curiosity and asking permission. Those are all very great, because then you're not putting up a mask. You're saying, I'm curious. I want to be sensitive to, your comfort level, and being transparent about all that.
Yeah.
But being actively rebellious, I like that.
That was like, for me, like that connection of curiosity and rebellion. Outside of religion, that idea for me that like, for me, it was like connecting to that, like the broader piece of like, so much of this work and the work that a lot of other people do about, connection is given the fact that we live in a very disconnected world, right? Like, so many people walk around, nobody sees them, nobody hears them, and they think that's the way it should be, right? Like, or rather there's a normalcy to it. Like, this is just how it is to work here, how it is to be here, how it is to be a parent, whatever the case might be. And that, like, to rebel against that, like to be able to, and I thought about it in my own, like, I've been doing a lot with, like, if I have a friend, if I'm interacting with a friend, I'm going to ask them about what they're most proud of in the last month, knowing it's likely going to make them uncomfortable. And I don't even warm it up. I just, and so framing that as an act of rebellion. But also, I think the type of rebellion that, makes the world a better place, right?
Yes. Yeah. That opens things up.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I really appreciate your time. This was a super fun conversation, right?
Thank you. Yeah, it was really fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jen.
Thank you both. It was enjoyable.
And thanks everybody else that might have been watching. My name is Brian Fretwell. This is Bree Zoller. We're part of Finding Good. If you want to check us out, findinggood.com. We'll show you how to ask better questions to create some of the connection that we talk about today. And this was super fun. Awesome. All right.